Yeah.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the second webinar of a series of webinars we are organizing together with API. Can you please confirm me that you can hear me? Can you use the chat box to write yes if you can hear me and no?
Hello.
Or hello.
Or good evening.
Or nice to see you again. I see that we have many people online already. So can you please, oh yes, great. Hello, hello everyone. So my name is Luisa Giel and this is my colleague George Heritage. We're here again with you to talk about assessment. These webinars are intended to prepare you for the national conference API is holding in April. And we'll be there, obviously, and we hope to see you. And today we are going to talk about
writing, about the assessment of writing to try and help you as teachers give your students useful tasks that will help them and help you see where they need to improve. And we'll talk about the Cambridge English approach to assessing writing, our model of writing and how we apply that to our tasks.
Yes, always thinking that we assess to learn, to help our students learn. Also, this is the second webinar, as we told you. You can watch the recording of the first. And if you haven't attended the first, we will send you the link together with a follow-up email after this second webinar. We had great feedback after the first webinar, and we hope that you enjoy this one too. So now we'll switch to the presentation. You'll stop looking at our faces, but we'll be back. Well, we'll be here the whole time, but you'll be able to see us at the end.
And there'll be time for questions at the end as well.
Yes, and also if you think of something after the webinar, you can always contact us because we'll give you our contacts. Okay, so let's go to the presentation. Okay, and in a few seconds, you should, hi Julia, so many familiar names. I'm so happy to see you all. Can you see the first slide now? Just type the chat box. Yes. Good. Yes, we can start.
Right. So to get warmed up for the topic today, we'll start off with a few questions about assessing writing. So we're going to show you some examples of different assessment practices. And for each one, we'd like you to tell us, is an example of good assessment practice or of bad assessment practice? For this first one, we'd like you to vote using the polling function. Let's have a go.
Okay, just a second while we set up the polling. Okay, you'll be able to vote. Okay, good. Just 1 second, yes.
So, A for good and B for bad. A writing test that includes the question, what is 1 + 1? Is this test a good or a bad way of assessing writing? Vote now using the buttons on the right side of your screen.
Yes. So
slightly undecided.
Very, very interesting.
So what is 1 + 1? Is this a good or a bad example of a test of writing?
Yes. Great. Oh, quite clear tendency.
That's encouraging.
That's very encouraging.
Yes, this was an example of bad assessment practice. Most of you didn't think it was a good idea.
Yes, 90% of you answered that it was a bad idea.
So let's move on to the second example. This time we'd just like you to type good or bad in the chat box. And so a writing task where we know who the intended reader is? Just in the chat box.
Okay. Good. Okay.
One good.
Teresa. So a writing task
Bad.
where
Good.
we
good,
know
good, good.
who the intended reader is. Okay, so all the answers are coming through. Yes. Everyone agrees.
So yes, most of you have said it's a good example.
Great.
So now let's look at a third example.
And for this one, we'll go back to voting, okay? So use the poll. Just 1 second. So can you yes.
So to help students improve their writing, a teacher administers a test and only provides a letter grade, A, B, C, D, E, F, U. Is this an example of good or bad writing assessment?
Okay, you can start voting now.
A for good and B for bad.
Yes.
So where we're trying to help students improve their writing, a teacher only provides a letter grade.
Is this an example of good or bad writing assessment? Okay, we have a very clear tendency.
Yeah, most of you have said
it's a bad example. Yes.
Which is encouraging. So it seems from your answers that everybody knows what they're talking about for making good writing tests. And these three questions actually correspond to the three parts of our webinar today, which are what to assess, how to elicit writing, and how to evaluate writing. So when we want to assess writing, we first need to know what we're assessing. The 1+1 example we've just looked at wasn't assessing writing, was it?
So once we know what we're assessing, we need to know how to go about doing that. And that involves eliciting an appropriate sample of writing. So specifying who the reader is may be part of that.
And once we have the writing sample in our hands, we need to think about an appropriate and fair way of evaluating that writing, whether giving a letter grade is suitable or if other ways would be better.
So let's look at each of these in more detail now, okay?
So first, let's have a look at what to assess. We're going to start with a poll again.
What a surprise.
So yeah, we do like this technology.
We love.
So,
and also it keeps you busy.
Yeah, and keeps Louisa busy.
It keeps me very busy.
So get ready to vote again. Which of the following is not an aspect of writing ability? Writing the letter A, typing speed, writing a magazine article, or spelling?
Okay, so you can vote now using your poll tool. Okay, some answers are coming.
Which
Great.
of these is not an aspect of writing ability?
So one of these is not an aspect of writing ability. Okay. Very interesting.
Bit of indecision, a little bit.
Yes, but quite a clear pattern. Very interesting. We have very experienced teachers here.
So most of you have correctly voted for B, typing speed, which is again great and encouraging because it's not really an aspect of writing ability. But we hope this question also made you think a little bit and realize something. When we think of writing, we tend to automatically think of long, extended texts like books.
But if we think a bit more carefully and remember that there are beginner writers, then we realize that the ability to use a pen to form the letter A on the page is also writing. And in between, there are a range of things that also count as part of writing, such as being able to spell words correctly, writing text messages, and filling in application forms.
And behind all of these different kinds of writing are a range of skills, a number of which we've listed on this slide. So when we talk about assessing writing, we need to ask ourselves, what exactly do we mean by writing? What underlying skills are we interested in? What sub-skills are we trying to test? And if we include all aspects of writing ability, it's a pretty exhaustive, very long list of skills, and it's probably quite difficult to assess them all fairly and consistently at once.
So let's try to learn a little bit more about you. Please take a look at the list now and choose one aspect of writing ability that is relevant and type it into the chat box if you can. If you want, you can also type in why you think that aspect of writing ability is relevant for the learners you teach, okay? So from this list, choose one that is relevant. Now just look at the skills on the screen and pick one that is relevant to your learners, okay? It might be one that your students find particularly difficult, or it might be one that you're really structure, good editing, coherence, accuracy, Claudia, organization,
originality,
structure, a lot of structure, coherence, creativity, vocabulary, grammar, yes. So it also depends on the levels, of course, you're teaching. So
I think the most popular at the moment
is
coherence and structure.
Accuracy quite a lot too. Yeah, vocabulary if you're teaching the little ones, but also if you're teaching.
Yeah, Andrea, third and fourth graders vocabulary.
Yes, of course.
I mean, the lower the level, the greater the focus on accuracy, vocabulary, grammar. But the higher you go, the more I think things like coherence, and structure, and organization come into play. And they can be difficult, I know, especially to teach younger students.
Isabel is saying why she chose originality. It keeps students interested and willing to keep on writing. Of course, that's very important for higher level students, obviously.
So what you choose to assess isn't a random decision, of course, and there are lots of things that need to be considered in order to arrive at an answer. So let's talk briefly about some more aspects. Firstly, as was clear from that poll, we need to think about who's being assessed. The kind of writing the student will need and that you as a teacher will need to focus on will depend on things such as the learner's age, profession, culture, gender, education, etc.
Second, some skills are more suitable to be assessed at different levels of competency. For example, here's a question we'd like you to vote on again. One item on the list of skills earlier is register, okay? So, should register be a focus of assessment among beginning writers? So, those at A1 and A2 levels?
Yes or no?
Or no?
Should we focus on register?
Let us just set up the poll so you can vote and we can see your answers. So should register be an assessment focus among beginning writers? Yes or no? Well, again, a very clear tendency.
Which makes us happy.
Which makes us very happy.
As you all know, at this level, learners are only just building up their knowledge of vocabulary, grammatical structures, and don't quite have the range yet to really consider register in depth. They might know that certain words are slang, some are more formal, but it's probably far better from a pedagogical perspective to focus on these later on.
On the other hand, spelling might be an issue at various levels, but will probably receive greater emphasis at the lower levels, of course. So when learners are at a level where they can produce extended text, then we need to think about what sub-skills are involved in that.
In the case of Cambridge English, when we looked at various models and conceptions of writing ability, we saw that they all had the following components. In extended writing, we always produce a message. Any of our tasks, the end result will involve and be a message. So in order to do this, the writer needs to first think about what they want to say. This is the cognitive aspect of writing.
This is
the
idea, thinking and planning in the cognitive aspect of writing, of course. And then they need to have the words to express this.
Which is the linguistic aspect. And then, and again, as we said, maybe for higher levels more, depending on what they're writing, who they're writing to, and for what reason, they need to adjust their writing so it's appropriate for the audience and the message. And this is
the social linguistic aspect.
And as you imagine, and as you know as teachers, these different dimensions all interact with one another when a piece of writing is being produced.
Of course. So when we write, we need to think and then decide what language we need and what is best for a particular situation to convey the message most efficiently
and effectively.
But
as we said earlier, each of these aspects is then again composed of many other sub-skills. So the linguistic dimension would obviously include
things like vocabulary and grammar, among other things. So what about the cognitive dimension of writing?
What about cognitive? Which sub-skills fall into the cognitive dimension of writing?
Can you think of some and type in the chat box now?
Which sub-skills form the cognitive dimension of writing?
So remember that the cognitive aspect has to do with the thinking and the planning of writing, okay? So when they're thinking about what they're going to write, when they're planning, which skills, sub-skills do they need to have? Wow.
Annabella, organization, yes.
Good. Think about the list that you don't have now that we saw before. Yes, coherence, planning. Remember, one of the things that came up when you were choosing the most important, of course, organization, coherence, structure, of course, yes. Also register.
Register's a bit more sociolinguistic.
Yes, it has to do with the audience.
Who you're writing to, the type of language, the register you're using.
And the purpose of what you're writing.
Yep. Okay, lovely. We're all in agreement there.
Very good. Great.
So,
moving on.
The next step.
You also want to think about why the test takers are being assessed. So, in a large-scale exam, the focus will likely be on proficiency or achievement. Will more likely focus on macro skills.
In the classroom context, assessment is more likely to be formative and supporting instruction. So you might want to focus on a particular sub-skill in detail, as well as on the very process itself of writing.
Yes, because writing is, after all, not just about the product or the end result. And in some cases, the process of writing may include collaboration with other people to produce a text.
As you can probably imagine, assessing this process is easier to do in the classroom. Large-scale external exams, it's probably less appropriate to have test takers collaborate to produce a piece of text.
It is also very difficult to assess someone's planning or editing in large-scale exams, particularly because a writing process can go through review and edit stages more than once.
These stages might be reflected in the quality of the product that gets submitted, but they are generally not assessed directly in an exam.
And on the other hand, it is possible to assess how students plan and monitor their work in the classroom. And this can be useful for encouraging more engagement with these aspects of writing, which is something that we all want as teachers. We want to engage our students and make them write more so they can improve.
So, to summarize this first section, to assess writing properly, we need to think carefully about what we're assessing and bear in mind that this is influenced by the considerations of who we are assessing and for what purpose we are assessing them. So, having thought a little bit about what to assess, let's think about how we might go about getting a sample of writing so that we can assess it.
We said earlier that it's important to consider who you're assessing. So let's look at an example.
Here are two example tasks. What type of learner is each of these writing tasks suitable for? Please just share your ideas in the chat box.
Okay, so what type of learners is each of these writing tasks suitable for? Okay.
So you could just put A
or B. Task A, what are the children doing now? And you have a picture, who is with the children? And task B, you're expecting a delivery but won't be at the office today. Write an email to your colleague asking her to receive the package for you. Okay, just type.
Task A and the type of learner, or B and the type of learner?
Yes. So, okay, task A, beginners. Yes.
Young learners.
Young learners for task A, great.
A for children, B for
B
adults.
for adults. Yes, it is an office context for task B, intermediate. Michaela. Yeah.
Business English, very nice.
Yes. Yes.
Task A, A1, A2, beginners. Lovely.
Very interesting. Yes. So in addition to age, we can also think about other characteristics of the person being assessed. Earlier, we mentioned application forms. If the person is an adult, then perhaps making them fill in a job application form is more appropriate. On the other hand, if they're students, then an application to join the school English club is probably more appropriate.
You can also, obviously, adjust the task according to their level. Blue beginners, the application form may just ask them to fill in their name, address, contact details, age. On the other hand, if they know more English, they can be asked about their reason for joining the club and what their expectations are. This would hopefully make them produce slightly more writing, and it's also more challenging on a cognitive level.
Yes. So sometimes you want to target and assess a particular skill. For example, you might want your students to learn about paragraphing.
So you could give them a block of text, obviously probably in English, not in Latin.
No, maybe not.
And just ask them to insert paragraph breaks into suitable places.
Using a passage of real text, you could use a similar task to discuss how breaking the text in different places might be more or less appropriate.
We're sure you can think of many other ways to test different aspects of writing ability. Let's take one item from the list of sub-skills we looked at earlier.
Planning. You all loved planning also, so I think you'll like this. So how might you assess learners' ability to plan before producing a piece of writing? Okay, share your thoughts in the chat box now. And I know this is something that Portuguese teachers really,
I love Latin too, Anna.
Yes, we all love
I think
Latin.
Everyone should love Latin, really. Thanks for that message. But how
would you
assess your learner's ability to plan and organize effectively?
Yes, this is something that we discuss very often in Portugal, because we feel that our students need more of this sub-skill. So to assess their ability to plan. How can we do this? Any ideas? Just share them. It's just the first person that shares will win a prize. No, because it only takes one person to share and then everyone's. Oh, Sancha, thank you. Showing a scheme before writing. Yes. Paragraph. Mind maps. Very interesting.
Nice, Maria.
Yes,
Yeah.
Maria. Yes, of course. Topics, schemes. Yes, doing an outline. Brainstorming, of course. Ideas, mind maps. Yes, Claudia.
Outlining.
Yeah.
Bullet points are often useful.
Yeah.
What can be quite useful is give your students a model answer, which you can find in all of our handbooks, or anything you want really, and give them a piece of writing, an article, a report, a letter, and ask them to go backwards and break that down into bullet points.
Yes.
Talk about the structure and to do it in the opposite way.
Yes, instead of asking them to write, ask them to analyze a piece of writing.
So obviously planning is very important in exam situations because you only have a fixed amount of time.
Yes.
And I always used to tell my students to spend 10% of the total time planning, because then if you freak out in the middle of the exam, it doesn't matter. You
because
have your plan there.
You know where to go.
Take a deep breath.
Yes.
And continue calmly.
So when it comes to extended writing, we said earlier that there are 4 main aspects to this ability. So let's think about this a little. How might we construct a writing task that elicits all 4 aspects?
So if the instruction simply says write, you might get some words. So there we have the linguistic aspect covered. If you're slightly more detailed in your instructions and said, write about a particular topic, we'll end up with more of a message. If you specify that it's to write in a particular genre and that it is for a specific audience,
well, then you're able to assess the social linguistic aspect of writing skill.
And finally, if you say what the purpose of the task is and the various parts that need to be included, you can make sure they have to engage their cognitive faculties to think about the topics and produce a well-structured, well-organized response.
So the point is, for your writing task, you need to put enough detail in the instructions. And this is really important because you need to make sure you elicit all aspects of the ability you're interested in.
So we don't expect you to read all of this, but the rubric, the instructions for this task says, read Andrew's letter and the notes you have made. Then write a letter to Andrew using all of your notes. Your notes are the bits on the right-hand side coming off the text.
Is there something in there that says write?
Yes.
Write about something?
Yes.
Write in a particular genre to a particular audience?
Yes, because they're instructed to write a letter to their friend Andrew. Write about a number of different things.
Also, as well.
Yes, the notes.
Yes.
So there are a few more quite important things to consider, which we'll go over by asking you some multiple choice quiz questions.
Yes.
And we love these at Cambridge English. So get ready to vote and we will set up another poll. So the type of text or genre. Well done, Louisa. Which of the following
genres,
very good, is the least appropriate for assessing business English? A memo, a story, a report, or a newsletter?
You can vote.
A,
yes.
B, C, or D. Which is the least appropriate
genre
for assessing business English? Memo, story, yes, well done. I think we've all got this as well. It's a story.
It's a story. Just to go back to the chat, There was a question about not being able to read the messages. You should be able to read the messages by clicking on the icon chat. So maybe it's a problem of configuration. You can't see the full screen, but you should be able to read what everyone's writing. Okay, because there was a question from Natalia. You should. But well, we can after the webinar, you can write me an email and we can help you with that. Okay?
So yes.
Now we'll go on.
Story. The type of text or
genre
is an important consideration because the language is going to be different depending on the kind of writing we're producing or we're asking our students to produce. So here's another question.
Yes, another question for you.
Which of the following genres, this is a bit of a trick question, I think, but which of the following genres is the least appropriate for assessing academic English?
Yes, just a second.
Essay, report, email, or newspaper article?
And you can vote now.
Which of the following genres is the least appropriate for assessing academic English?
And Natalia can read the chat now. Great.
Excellent.
So everything is sorted. Okay, and everyone's voting. Oh, very interesting.
Very interesting.
So the least.
See, I do think this is a bit of a trick question.
Yes, it is.
Everyone is going for email.
Most people are going for email. Yes. Yes, a clear, very clear tendency. Good.
Everyone's going for email. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, it's very
An
interesting.
essay, obviously very academic. A report, depending on the branch of academia. Email and newspaper article, I would say, could be wrong or right, both of them. It depends on your email. I mean, within a university context, writing an email to your professor, for example, and the newspaper article depends on the type of newspaper article. I'm a big fan of using newspaper articles to teach different types of registers, both from a reading point of view and a writing point of view. So yeah, newspaper article, I will understand why people didn't go for that. I understand why people did go for email.
Good.
So
next, it is important to know the purpose for writing. For example, if you are working in customer services, you are unlikely to write a letter of complaint and more likely to write a response to someone else's complaint. So the language you use in these two situations would be very different because the writing tasks aim to do different things, of course.
In other words, they have differing purposes, even though they're both examples of the same
genre.
They're both letters. So when you, as teachers, are setting a task, you can make sure that the purpose for writing matches the role of the writer. Doing this will help you to elicit an appropriate writing sample.
Yes. So then it's also important to determine who the audience is. We write very differently when we write to people we know and to people we don't know. We write differently when it's private communication addressed to just one person and when it's a public document addressed to the entire world.
Of course, when designing an assessment task, we would consider both the purpose and the audience, because not all purposes fit with all possible audiences.
Of course. The examples here are from a business English setting, and the differences between these audiences could be more or less important depending on the purpose included in the task.
Think about the audiences suitable for your particular group of students and their level of competency. In a school setting, possible audiences that might be used are a friend, a teacher, classmates. So earlier, we also mentioned the writing process as one aspect of writing that teachers may want to focus on. If that is the focus, it's important to break the writing process down to its component steps and set appropriate tasks so you can evaluate your learners' skills in the separate areas such as planning, paraphrasing, and the ability to revise one's own writing, either on your own, resulting from feedback from the teacher, or peer feedback from other learners.
So we've looked at how we elicit writing, and having elicited some samples of writing, you will now need to evaluate that piece of writing, of course. So let's look at the different ways to evaluate writing tasks.
In some approaches, the marking can be suggested by the task itself. For example, this A2 level task, which you hopefully can see on the screen, just asks for a simple written response. What are the children doing now? Responses saying eating would be marked correct. Things like organization, register, grammar aren't really tested here.
Not really. So you can change how you score many simple tasks based on which aspects of writing you're trying to assess. You might need the spelling to be accurate before you award a mark.
Let's imagine a student responded with the word eat. This is close to eating,
but it's not the correct form.
So there you could bring some grammatical knowledge into the assessment.
Yeah.
But on the other hand, a response of sitting at the dinner table would demonstrate quite advanced writing ability, but isn't the response we originally looked at. So even a task like this, especially quite useful in classes where you have mixed abilities.
Yes.
Being able to differentiate between learners. If you have from A2 to high B1 in the same class, there are different approaches to using the same tasks to try and extract what you want from the students. You could give them a task like this and ask them to give a grammatically correct response using as many words as possible. So
Yes.
Your stronger students could say, well, the girls are sitting there looking at each other, and the one with the red hair is holding her fork, but the boy is looking a little distracted and has his mouth open. For example, eating is a correct answer. Longer answers could also be considered correct.
So let's look back at this task, the Latin one that you loved, suggested for more advanced learners earlier on, introducing paragraph breaks. For this type of task, you could
give marks for the most appropriate paragraph breaks.
You could also give detailed feedback about the appropriateness of choices.
You could discuss how breaking the text in different places affects the text.
Or you can point out paragraphs that are too long or too short.
When it comes to extended writing, there are more things going on at the same time. So there are a range of different ways and approaches to go about assessing and about marking.
If you look at this chart, you'll see a listing of options for evaluating extended writing. And these can range from giving the detailed, like giving comments and feedback, to the more summative, as in giving a single score.
So the purpose and the context of the assessment can suggest which is more appropriate. For example, would peer feedback be more appropriate in classroom assessment or in large-scale assessment? Please type your answers in the chat box.
So would you use peer assessment for classroom assessment or for large-scale assessment? Imagine a national exam being assessed through peer feedback. Peer feedback.
Peer feedback, more appropriate in class.
Oh, yes.
Or
in class.
Large scale.
No problem, Dora. We're happy that you're here. Better late than never. Oh, everyone.
Class.
Yes, everyone is.
So yes, peer feedback more appropriate for classroom assessment. If it were a large-scale test determining entry to university, and your peers were in charge of giving feedback for the admissions officer to read, every single student would probably be described as very good or excellent, and the admissions officer wouldn't know who to admit or who not to admit.
And now how about giving a single score? Is that more appropriate for a classroom test or for a large-scale test? You can type your answers again in the chat box. So thinking about giving a single score, is this useful for a classroom test, more useful, or for a large scale test?
Claudia's the first one. Large scale, large
Large
scale,
scale.
large scale.
Think about the information you're giving to your students and think about the ways you can help them. So, yes.
Very nice, very nice.
No surprise. Yeah.
So yeah, a single score is always going to be more appropriate for a large scale test,
Of course.
especially if you're testing tens of thousands of candidates.
You can't give feedback to all of them, and you can't use peer feedback also.
So yeah, generally speaking, the approaches to marking and assessing nearer the top of this table are more appropriate for classroom assessment, and the ones nearer the bottom more appropriate for large-scale achievement and summative decision marking contexts.
And what's really important here, and this is something we want you to take with you, is that one type of testing is not better than the other. It's that they're different contexts and they have different purposes. So you approach them the way you want, and it has to do with what you want to assess.
We did talk about this last time when we were talking very generally about assessment and looking at lots of different task types.
Yes.
And in some contexts, a multiple choice, for example, is not appropriate, but it doesn't mean that it's bad, because you can use multiple choice, for example, to test listening for detail, for example. All task types are valid.
You just have to think about the purpose.
Exactly.
And what you're
They're
testing.
not all reliable depending on the context.
Of course.
And we will be going on, as we said last time, to look at the other 3 skills in detail. So we'll be doing a session on assessing reading, assessing speaking, and assessing listening. And we will go further into depth on which approaches to assessment, both in the classroom and in large-scale assessment, are more appropriate for each of these skills.
Great. Oh, I like this one. When we think about providing a single score, sometimes referred to as a holistic score or a number of scores, which we refer to analytic scores, some people see a difference. For
Some
example,
people say that when we read a piece of text, we read it as a whole rather than separately reading it along a number of dimensions. So they think that holistic scoring is more in keeping with how we read.
On the other hand, it's also the case that what's scored is what is given value. So it signals what learners and their teachers need to pay attention to.
In the 2 examples on screen, both represent 8 as the total score, but the sub-scores on the right-hand side tell us that there is one part of the overall performance that is stronger than the other. This can then support learning by identifying areas that need extra attention. In our case, at Cambridge English, we sometimes provide a single score and sometimes a number of sub-scores.
For the for the longer pieces of writing, of course, where more is going on, we use our diagram on the sub-skills involved in writing aspects to help us.
Remember, there are 4 main aspects of writing ability: message, linguistic, cognitive, and sociolinguistic. So I hope all of you who prepare students for our exams are familiar with our writing mark schemes. And it is no coincidence that our mark schemes have 4 separate criteria, as you can see on screen: content, communicative achievement, organization, and language. Each of these criteria corresponds to one of the 4 dimensions in the diagram from before. So content corresponds to being able to produce a message. Things like all content is relevant to the task, the target reader is fully informed, we've got the message across. Communicative achievement
deals with audience awareness and register. So in other words, the social linguistic aspect.
For example, uses the conventions of the communicative task effectively to keep the target reader's attention and communicate straightforward and complex ideas as appropriate.
So the way a text is organized gives us a clue on what the writer is thinking of and trying to do, which is the cognitive aspect. And language obviously covers the linguistic bit.
Range of vocabulary, a range of simple and complex grammatical forms is all linguistic. So you can see here how we break down the 4 separate skills that come together, and we can assess separately to fairly and consistently assess a piece of writing.
And this way, we hope to encourage learners and their teachers to work not just on the accuracy of their language, for example, but also to pay attention to larger matters, such as the features of the type of writing or how it is organized.
It's definitely not a bad idea. I would, in fact, say it's always a good idea.
It's always a good idea
to give this criteria to your students so they know exactly what they need to pay attention to and learn to self-assess. If they know how you are marking what they are doing, then they can take all of that into account. And it can help them learn where they're stronger and where they're weaker.
And speaking of self-assessment, which is something that I know everyone's really interested in developing with their students, but it's really challenging, checklists that we love can be quite useful. So here's one for you.
This is a checklist for younger learners, which we found online. And you can see, firstly, that it simplifies the language used inside it so that the learners themselves can use the checklist if necessary.
It says, for instance, tall letters tall, and my letters sitting on the line, which is really cute.
Going back to this B2 mark scheme, a lot of the language in here would be a bit high for some of the B2 candidates.
Yeah.
So an interesting exercise for you as teachers is to try and break this down into more accessible language for them.
Yes.
The younger learners one, yeah, it's lovely. Keep my tall letters tall. You have L and I have G.
I have G. I have G too, LG.
You have 2 G's and I have an H. So I think you have more tall letters probably in your name than me.
Yeah.
Tall letters tall, my letter's sitting on the line. There's another good point halfway down, which talks about using daring words they haven't used before. A bit like Louisa today with
genre.
Genre, very beautifully pronounced there. Some learners are afraid of making mistakes, and so, as you know, try to stay on the safe side and only use words they know. But we all know that you only learn from using, and you only really learn from using and making mistakes and learning from those mistakes. So this checklist item, we think,
positively supports learning by emphasizing daring as a good thing and not focusing on mistakes, which is really what we want our students to do. So all in all, this is quite a good checklist that should support further writing development.
And if you think about it, checklists are a great way of providing feedback on things that can typically cause learners' problems when they write.
However, oh, look at this. If the teacher writes extended feedback, like the marked up piece of writing you can see on screen, they can point out things that are more specific to the individual, and this is extremely useful for their learning process. As with checklists, these can be used by learners to further improve their writing. So writing feedback in a way that learners can act upon is an excellent idea, of course.
For example, comment 2, good. You are answering all of the questions, but try not to start every sentence in the same way. Use sentences with different structures. Or comment 5, good. These are the correct terms to use here. And we know if you have a class of 40 candidates, then 40 students even, sorry, then it's not always
not 40, we haven't gone that far, but we do have classes
30,
of 30.
It's very difficult for teachers to do this. So
because you have 7 or 8 classes of 30 students.
So breaking things like marking criteria down and providing them with checklists is a good way for them to regulate what they're doing. And from a marking point of view, you can use a checklist to help mark them. if you have 10 points on the checklist, you can just underline a problem in their writing and say point 3, underline another one, point 7. And it puts a lot more responsibility in the learner's hands so that they can help improve themselves.
So to recap, we're about to finish. In our webinar today, we talked about what to assess when we want to assess writing.
After establishing what it is that we want to assess, we then outlined how to go about assessing these skills, both how to elicit the sample of writing and how to evaluate the piece of writing.
The important thing to note throughout is that the who, what, and why will be different.
In other words, depending on the people we're assessing, what we're assessing, and why we're assessing, our assessment, which is the how, will correspondingly be different.
It is therefore important to think about all these different dimensions in the practice of assessing writing. We are about to finish, and as we told you in the beginning, you will receive a follow-up email with your certificate, also with all the material from this webinar, the presentation and the handouts. And if you have any questions after that, you can always write us. We've received lots of emails after the first webinar, all of them very nice. Some were just to comment and say that they really enjoyed, others with questions. So we're more than happy to give you more information.
So I'll just go over a few free resources that Cambridge English have to help you and help your students with their writing. But whilst I do that, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat box.
Type them in the chat box, and yes.
So firstly, write and improve. I know we spoke about this last time, but especially for writing, obviously, it's a very useful tool. Free website for learners of English and teachers to practice their written English. They can copy or type a piece of written English into the system and then receive feedback in seconds, covering spelling, vocabulary, grammar, and general style.
Yes, this is.
We'll also tell them what CAFR level, more or less, their writing is. This is still getting better and better all the time, and it is still learning. So the more that it is used,
yes,
the better. So please encourage. And from a teacher's point of view, you can either go straight onto this and write something down and it will mark you, but you can create a workbook with a topic of your choice or a task that you create, and then your students log into that workbook so you can monitor what they're doing on the workbook. They're getting marked instantly by the program. You can keep an eye on how they're getting on.
Yeah, that's really excellent. And also, you can always find free resources for teachers, information about our teaching qualifications, information about the Cambridge English Teaching Framework, and more webinars on our website, okay? Also, you should sign up to receive our updates, sign up to receive our newsletter so you can read about everything we're doing. Yes.
The Teaching English especially is, again, growing all the time. I think we have, I don't know, 100, 120 activities on there at the moment.
Yeah.
You can go on, you can click the level that you want.
The time you want to spend.
The time that you have, the skill that you want to practice, and there's a lot of free stuff on there, and it's growing and growing all the time.
Natalia is already online searching for our tools. We'll send you all the links, and do try them, please, because we do need more Portuguese teachers using these tools so we can adapt them, improve them according to your feedback.
The more they get used, the more activities that will become available. Another really, really cool thing. At the moment, it's in development and it only works for B2 level. But if you go to something called Weekly, you can type in, at the moment, just First for Schools, but you type in the number of weeks, the amount of time per week, and it will create a lesson plan for you with free activities.
Yes. And Eduarda, yes, the webinar is recorded, so you can watch the video later, okay? It was really an excellent webinar.
If you want something a little more highbrow, academic, there are these which are published by Cambridge University Press in class, which talk about studies in language testing. They discuss in detail the assessment of reading, writing, listening, and speaking.
Yes. And that's it from us. You have our contacts here. We'll just turn. It was extremely good to see so many people at the end of the day logging in to attend the webinar. It's really a pleasure.
Annabella, should multiple scores be used with A2 students? I think it's difficult because what are you focusing on? I mean, if you look at our key for schools writing, that is holistically marked. So key for schools, there are always 3 points that the candidates need to cover in their answer. And basically, if those 3 points are answered and the audience reader, well, the audience understands or that message has been put across, they will get very good or top marks. Vocabulary and grammar, if it's wrong, but it doesn't get in the way of the message, it still gets 4 or 5 out of 5.
Yeah.
So multiple scores for lower levels are more difficult, but it depends what you're focusing on.
Great. So I'll just turn on the video again so you can see us and say goodbye. Great. It was, I think you can see us now. Yes. Thank you. I'm so happy you loved the experience, Anna. We loved it.
We love it as well.
And we'll be back.
And which skill would you like next?
Yes.
Reading, speaking, or listening?
Maybe.
We should have set up a poll for this, really.
Yes, we didn't. But you can write your answer in the chat box.
We will get through all of them before the
will.
API conference, and we look forward to seeing as many of you there as
Do
possible.
come to say hi, please, okay? We'll be there the whole time.
Yeah.
And you'll see George because he's very tall. I'm small, but he's tall.
But she'll normally be close to me. She'll be the small, loud one.
Small.
She's much louder and I'm much quieter.
It depends. Listening, speaking, great. Thank you so much for your participation. It was really great. And we hope to see you again soon. You will receive the invitation. And before that, you'll receive the follow-up email with all the information about this webinar. Okay?
Any specific questions, please email either of us.
Yes, we are more than happy to help you. Okay? Great. So enjoy your dinner. We're going to do the same.
Yeah, have a lovely dinner and a lovely evening.
Yes.
And we'll see you in a couple of weeks, I imagine.
Yes, not long from now. No, very soon. You'll receive the invitation. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.